Good afternoon. This is Andrea Ormsby, and I help moms get clear on what their next steps should be so that they can mother from a place of strength and courage instead of from a place of fear. So I wanted to come on today. I wanted to basically give you another insight into my book. If you have followed me on Periscope at all or Facebook, you know that I just released my first book, Twin Mom Method, Being Honest with Your Children. And there are a lot of different topics that I talk about in the book, specifically in the approach that I have created in creating the type of relationship that I want to have with my children. I have a 9-year-old and twin 7-year-olds, and specifically the relationship that I want to instill in them, that I am a safe place that they can come to if they have any questions or any concerns or any ideas that they just want to bounce it off of me. That basically trusting and open relationship that unfortunately our culture does not encourage. And so this is why I am very intentional when I am mothering my boys, because I have 3 wonderful boys and it's always fun, but I still intentionally make those moments that I can have those conversations with them so that I can help them understand their world and understand what they're trying to learn how to process for themselves. And so specifically, there is a chapter in my book in regards to bullying. And if you haven't dealt with bullying yet, maybe you still have babies growing inside of you, especially if you're a twin mom. I remember, oh, how I remember. I miss those days. I actually do love when they were moving inside of me. Yes, all the discomfort and everything, I miss those days. But it is definitely different stages that I enjoy as they have grown. But regardless of whether you have 1 or 2 maybe growing inside of you, maybe you only have 1 or 2 or more children, it does not take away from the fact that you will most likely have to deal with bullying at some point. And perhaps your child might be subject to bullying, or maybe your child might be the bullier. And so it's something, hey Kathy, good to see you on Facebook here. And maybe it's something that you are not even aware of. Sometimes, unfortunately, these type of experiences happen and we're not even familiar with it actually happening unless we hear from our child or children, or maybe you hear from another adult, or maybe the actual teacher, or you just notice that there's some differences going on with your child and you haven't really figured it out, and then over time it ends up exploding. Maybe you had an experience of some type of tantrum that is just completely unrelated to the way that they normally frustrate or deal with things, and maybe they're having struggles in other areas and it tends to bleed into this. These are some of the signs that there could be some bullying going on in whatever school setting you have. I don't care if you're in the public school system or in the private school system, if you're even homeschooling and maybe you're involved in various co-ops. Bullying happens everywhere. It could even be happening at church, in various church ministries that your children might be involved in. Believe me when I tell you, it is happening everywhere. And if you are not being open with your child and having those open communications with them, you might miss opportunities to really help them process what is really going on. And so specifically, when I first had to start dealing with bullying, it definitely caught me off guard. Not off guard in the sense of me having that open conversation with my children, but what caught me most off guard was I did not realize how much the bullying was really affecting my child deep. And specifically, it was causing him to really question and doubt his own value as a person and his own value in terms of how God has created him. And so in the conversations that we started having since then, and in addition to that, as I continue to feed into his life, I'm really intentional about speaking truth to him, and truth that he can hold on to, truth that is biblical, that I know he can go to the Bible and see that truth, and truth as it stands in terms of how our family loves him and this particular child, because I have dealt with it with more than one of my children. But what I want to encourage you today, Mom, is what is really key when you have that kind of bullying situation is to really focus on helping your child to value themselves. What bullying does is it really tears away at the character that your child believes about himself. So maybe it's whether he believes that he is too short or too tall or too big or too small, or whatever it is. There's somebody who is chipping away at that character, and it could be an emotional, verbal thing that's going on. So it might not even be as physical as if they were physically punching your child. But what doesn't change is it negatively affects your child and negatively affects how your child is looking at him or herself. And this is why we as moms, we always have this intuition, and we always sense something is going on. And you might go through the natural questions of, how was your day? Fine. Did anything happen today? No. Did you do well on your test? Yes. Maybe you have those kind of usual conversations with your children, but you don't realize that there's something underlining maybe some of the other strange behaviors that you've been observing, or maybe your child has been a bit more quiet than usual. And it can be just basically hard to pinpoint, as much as you might try to find out if this is going on. Sometimes you may just have to full out ask. And by asking, it might be as simple as, is somebody calling you names at school? Or have you ever had someone say to you that you're too small? Or whatever it is that you think might kind of trigger for your child that whatever is going on really is not okay. Because what happens is, because children see things black and white, as I've spoken about this at least on Periscope, maybe on Facebook as well, children see things black and white. And so they hear maybe one or two or more children who are basically chipping at their character, calling them stupid, or calling them fat, or calling them too tall, or whatever it is. And they basically internalize that, or can internalize that as being truth. Except if they have a strong value system of themselves and a strong acceptance and belief about themselves, then they can know that they don't have to receive that criticism and ingest it for themselves. They don't have to take it as truth. As I've said in various conversations with my children, you are not what you are called, you are who you answer to. And I know that that's a common quote. I don't remember specifically who made that quote. If you know, feel free to put it up on the screen. But it is very, very true. You are not what you are called, but you are what you answer to, or who you answer to. And so because someone is calling you this name or criticizing you in this way does not mean that that is truth. And it doesn't matter how many people are doing that around you. And that might be the case in your child's case. If there is a group of people at the school, or a group of people in that particular group that they're involved in, who is making these kind of criticisms on them, then they may feel, well, everybody else thinks so, so it must be true. And these are the things that you want to focus on when you are mothering your child, and helping them to know that because there's a great quantity in numbers does not make it true. You want to help your child to think for themselves and really feed in the truths that we know about them. So in my case, I've specifically spoken Bible verses into my child's life, as well as spoken words of affirmation even to my child, so that they can know. And even in identifying it, maybe you can speak that to your child. Maybe you say, do you know that you are awesome? Do you know that God created you for a purpose? And really hear how they receive that. Because when you are unable to receive that kind of talk, then it shows that your belief system about yourself does not welcome that type of encouragement, because there's no place for it to take root, essentially. And I know as moms, very often we can actually relate to this. So many times people might say, oh, you have a wonderful outfit on. Where did you get that? And you might say, oh, this old thing, that's nothing. Or maybe you ridicule it, or you criticize it some other way. You basically try to downplay it. And a lot of times when you drill down to that, mom, a lot of that comes down to what you yourself are telling yourself in terms of how valuable you are, and how awesome you really are, how beautiful you look even after children. And so very similarly, we can find that sometimes the things that are going on in our children's lives really speak a lot to what's going on in our lives as moms. And so I really wanted to encourage that. I know when I specifically was first going through the bullying with my child, it was a lot of feelings and emotions I had to deal with. I personally was bullied when I was young as well. And I remember very vividly, actually, because I did not learn at the time how to process it. I basically learned over the years to kind of shelve it and move on because it was so difficult emotionally to deal with it. But because I knew that, I didn't want that for my children, because I realized when you shelve things, and Mom, maybe you know this, when you shelve things, they don't go away. They certainly do come back. And unfortunately, they come back to haunt you and can sometimes haunt you big. And maybe that's what's paralyzing you in pursuing your goals, or what's paralyzing you to move forward with whatever decision that you know you need to make. But you're afraid because of whatever has been paralyzing you, or what's been holding you back, or essentially what's been shelved and never dealt with. And so specifically, I really had to focus on the self-esteem for my child and really focus on building that up for him and helping him to know that despite what these other people were saying, and despite what even he might have been starting to say to himself, that it simply was just not true. And really fight for that for my baby. Because we can often get into our mama bear situations, and we just want to get at that child or those children and just take care of it. Don't we? I know. Because we're mama bears. How dare you affect my child in that way? How dare you speak to my baby? Do you know who my baby is? Do you know who I am? Maybe I need to let you know. And yes, I went through all of that and then some. Had to pray for forgiveness quite a few times because we are moms and we love our babies and we cannot stand to see them suffer. At the same time, these are life lessons that our children are going to have to deal with at some point, and they are going to need to have to learn how to work it through for themselves as well, with the support of us and additional people who love them right there with them, so that they know that even when it gets hard, they have that shoulder to cry on, or they still have that support and that acceptance, that safe place to come home to. But it still does not change the fact that they still need to make decisions for their benefit and for their betterment on their own, and not always feel that they have to run to mommy or daddy to take care of the difficult situation for them. And I specifically mention that because that is often very key, a problem that we have as moms. We very often will try to take care of things for our children as opposed to helping them to learn how to take care of it themselves. What a difference if we could teach our children that you have problem and then you have solution. And that they automatically see a problem as not a problem, but a way of trying to figure out how can I get my solution. That's such a powerful way for our children to grow up in life and to learn as a practice as they get older in their years and their days. Because you know, if you're in the workplace, problem, you have to figure out a solution somehow. Even if you're at home, often, problem, you have to still figure out that solution. And so to get your children into that practice of when there is a problem, how am I going to figure this out? That is such a key practice to put in place, but also to show them that they can be supported and that it's okay to make mistakes. And what do they do when they make a mistake? How do they look at it? How do they tweak it? These are all life lessons that you and I also need, Mom. And maybe that's something you've been struggling with literally today. Maybe you've been struggling with it recently. Maybe something has shown up in your children that has really resonated in you because maybe that's something you haven't processed recently. Specifically, I really want to encourage you that when that bullying situation comes, really focus on how you can speak into your child's life. Take those important moments with them and help them process, help them talk about how it's making them feel, help them really get through those emotions and see through all of that dust and grime and still come out knowing who they are and whose they are, so that they are awesome. They know they are awesome, and not just because mommy said so, but because they really are. This is the fact or the approach that I took with my child and children for future years. Honesty was always key in terms of how I approached that with them, and I definitely encourage that with you, that even when someone is saying not nice things, you can let them know, you know, that really isn't nice, and you're valid for feeling bad about it. At the same time, there's also a tendency that we can develop in this culture of always feeling like you're victimized, or that you can't do anything, you're hopeless, you're helpless. And it just leaves this mentality of not having control and just essentially staying unhappy. And that's not where I wanted my child to be. And therefore I approached helping him differently, from an honest place, a very safe place, but an empowering place specifically. And I do talk about that in my book. Teach them how to fish for themselves so that they don't have to keep coming to you for food, but they essentially can learn how to fish for themselves, and essentially they'll be able to have food for the rest of their lives. It's such a completely different approach, still helping them. One is enabling them to still remain dependent on you, whereas the other one is really focusing on them learning how not just to be dependent, but to figure things out for themselves. Very different approach. And again, this is how I have approached bullying with my children. The other thing I also want to mention is just making sure I read my notes. I want to make sure I cover everything that I wanted to talk to you today. Yes, I mentioned earlier that sometimes this can actually speak to you very personally. And sometimes I know for me, because I could relate to what my son was going through emotionally and feelings-wise, it actually made it kind of personal for me. It was almost as if I was in that classroom, or I was on that playground, and I was reliving what was going on again. And I want to encourage you if there are things you have not processed through, and that you're struggling with. Maybe you're seeing some of that. Maybe you didn't realize you shelved it over all those years. Maybe it was something that recently happened. You kind of push it off because you had to keep going. You had to keep it moving. I mean, life is going on. Life doesn't stop because you're having a bad day, or that someone hurt you, or that you're not feeling so great. Life keeps moving. And so maybe your defense mechanism was to just shelve it and keep going. And I want to encourage you that if you're seeing that ugly head, or seeing that box every time you pass it by, and seeing that it's still on that shelf and you've never dealt with it, you've never really opened it up, maybe you're afraid to, I want to encourage you to reach out to me. I have a garden that I manage throughout the summer. I'm very passionate about my garden, and I very much take a lot of care and attention to my garden. And in the same way, it's very symbolic and it's dear to my heart, because I definitely treat my relationship with my children in the exact same way. And I'm sure that you, mom, have specific intentions and goals and values that you want to instill in your children. And so you need to be intentional in doing that, so that you can reap the bounty of that harvest from putting all that time and effort and investment into your children.